Welcome back, everybody. It's Brian with Equal Protection Minnesota. Today we're here with Kaylee, abolitionist and anti-IVF advocate. We're here to talk to her about her story and find out some interesting news about something she received from a prominent pro-life organization. Kaylee, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm thankful for the time that you've made here today. You're a Christian, you're an abolitionist, you're anti-IVF, and would like to get into all that. And so I guess the best place to start is where were you born? Where did you grow up? And how did you come to faith in Christ?
I was born in Phoenix, Arizona. I did spend probably about equal amounts of time in Arizona and Southern California, but I like to say that I was raised in California because that's what I remember most. And I had a unique coming to Christ, I would say. I was raised Catholic. My dad and stepmom both professed to be Catholic.
Hmm.
I announced that I was an atheist to them probably when I was around 11 or 12, mostly to get out of going to Catholic church. It really bored me. I didn't want to wake up that
Sure.
early, and I figured that that would be the way to do it at 11 and 12. Um, but I soon began to believe um, the things that I was saying. I was really angry at God for some stuff that had happened in my life when I lived in Arizona.
Hmm.
Uh, and, I put off that anger as like a disbelief in him, just in case what the Bible said was true. I didn't have to carry that sort of guilt and, um, fear because I wasn't going to follow him.
Hmm.
Uh, Around November 2019, I was in a school shooting. Um, it was the first time I'd prayed in years. And I had told God, or at least tried to through my tears, that, if he could get me and the girl who was shot in front of me out of this, I would make an effort. He did do that. She lived. I lived, obviously.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and that effort started to be made. Um, Shortly that next year, I would become what I would call a Christian, baptized in 2022, and then became reformed shortly after that.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. That's kind of wild. The school situation. Um, I bet that was quite the trying time. It's often through tragedy like that that the Lord leads us to Him. So I'm thankful, obviously, that it worked out the way that it did. And so, what did you do after? So after you came to faith, you became reformed. And then what? Then what happened?
I'd always had pro-life convictions. I got pregnant at 18 right out of high school. And, when I was still learning about what it is to be a believer. And I've I feel like I've always held these convictions in some way. I would have called myself pro-choice through high school. For rape cases, life of the mother, the hard cases that we hear about all the time. Um, But I mean, it's natural to be pro-life, I think. The baby's a baby. You tell it to kids growing up that there's a baby growing in mommy's belly. And it's a natural, like, woman instinct to want to protect these children. And so I was already working with the pro-life movement when I became a believer. I started as a live action um, advocate, whatever they want to call their students that help them. Um, and, eventually got a call from Students for Life asking me if I wanted to be a part of one of their fellowships, specifically their Action Captain Fellowship. And I agreed. So I got a free trip to Washington, D.C., where they would train us. My fellowship specifically was on the political aspect of everything. So we got to kind of bypass a lot of the beginner trainings because a lot of us who are action captains already had a place in the pro-life movement. We already knew the apologetics on what we were talking about. So we got to meet with legislators while we were there and lobby with them. And that was mainly what our training was focused on.
So mainly focused on lobbying politicians to promote pro-life bills.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And so what kind of work so would that entail, I suppose? So what were they teaching you? How were they teaching you to go about it? Like how far were you allowed to go? Like what were you instructed to say? Things like that.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of what I did was media focused. We were in a place in Arizona, and I was the Arizona Action Captain, where we were fighting against Prop 139, which was going to establish constitutional protections in Arizona for abortion. Um, and so a lot of my job was talking to the media. We already had campaigns in effect that were trying to go against what was going on in Arizona. So I didn't have much to do on that front. A lot of it was talking to the media. So I was media trained by Students for Life. We knew exactly what to say and who to have with us when we were talking to the media. Students for Life would even set up some of the interviews for me, and I would go out and meet with their reporters. Um, and so I would say that it was media focused. We did learn in DC a lot about policy. A lot of it was focused on heartbeat bills that they were trying to get in at different state levels. And so, some of these legislators that were there that we had kind of hijacked their dinner with, um, we would present these bills, we'd try and get them to support it. And then, we would do some sort of campaigning for them on the Students for Life action side of it, if they were willing to support it in that state.
Okay. Okay. So it sounds like it was fairly scripted. Like you would have would you call them like handlers? Like people who would like instruct you on how to interact with the media? Or like what did you mean when you said like you said trained to who to have with you when you were talking to the media?
It's sort of a hard question to answer because I feel like most of the pro life argumentation is scripted anyway.
Okay.
There's no unique argument when it comes to pro lifers who are arguing on the internet, or at least there's very few variations. Um, they very much train you to argue in the way that Kristen Hawkins does. You're looking for that very surface level gotcha moment, not necessarily that deep philosophical conversation, or theological conversation on what life is and why it matters.
Okay. Okay. So it's really more focused on just keeping the argumentation, not really like diving into like what is the implication of all of these things. It's just all really surface level, almost like um in my own words, I would say what's necessary to win them over to a political cause.
Yeah, to be honest, I missed over half of their apologetics session. Partially because I already knew what I was talking about, but the other part of it was I had my baby with me and they were really responsive to letting me deal with the baby.
Sure,
But
sure.
yeah, I mean, as far as who to have with you, Students for Life has not necessarily a rule, but a recommendation
Hmm.
that if you're interviewing with someone, you have another pro-lifer with you, just so that you have a witness to what you've said. And so if the media were to try and skew it in
Ah,
any way, a witness, which is kind of a smart move.
sure, sure.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
anybody.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, that's a good idea. Can't knock them for that. And so, as you went about going through this fellowship and this training, what were some of the things that took place? And then there was an event that happened where you had posted something, and that kind of led to a confrontation of sorts. And so, can you kind of walk us through a little bit about what you were doing, and then what led up to this confrontation that you did have?
Yeah, I was gaining a lot of traction with Students for Life. We see it even now as they continue to use my story. But I 18 with a baby, college student, it was something that they, really played off of, and even I played off of, um, as like a unique story. And so they offered me a lot of positions to talk about it. I gained a lot of followers from other students that were associated with Students for Life. And I started gaining a big influence. Not my words, these are words from workers at Students for Life who know what have happened to me, and their thoughts on why this happened is I was gaining too much influence. And then coupled with my views on criminalization and some of the other views that they found out about, I became a threat to the organization. But while I was doing media interviews and all this other stuff, I was very vocal online about my position. Students for Life makes very clear that we are not spokespeople for the organization. They have their own fellowship for that as well. Um, and so you would think that my social media is my own. And as long as I'm not disparaging the pro life movement, I should be good. But I attend Apologia Church. My pastor is Jeff Durbin. He is famous for being reformed and, an abolitionist. And I just posted a sermon, a pretty simple sermon, had nothing to do with abortion. And a couple days later, I received a phone call from some of the leadership at Students for Life. The guy, it seemed like it was being forced upon him from people that were higher up from him. So no hate on him. He didn't seem like he wanted to do it. It was just the reality of the situation. But he had asked me exactly what I had posted. He hadn't seen it. It was just something that was brought to their attention. In which case I told him, I'd posted a video of my pastors who were very actively talking about what had happened in Louisiana at the time. And he had said that he didn't really see a problem as long as it was, my pastors. But if I continued down this road, that I would never be able to get a job in the pro-life movement, and I would not be allowed to continue my fellowship with Students for Life. And, Students for Life has a very anti-abolitionist position, and so a part of that comes with denouncing abolitionism and having nothing to do with it. But in doing so, I would also have to denounce my pastors, which is something I was unwilling to do. I made it very clear that that was something I was not willing to do, no matter what the consequences were. In which case, they allowed me to finish out my fellowship, but refused to work with me from that moment on.
They wanted you to renounce your pastors, like all of it.
That was not the words that he used,
Oh, sure. Okay.
and there's reasons for that, and I don't necessarily want to get into it because it would give away his identity. Um, but those were not the words he used, but it was very clear that that's what it would lead to. Um, you need to denounce abolitionism and the people associated with it to be a part of Students for Life. And that was not something I was willing to do when my pastors were the people associated with it.
Sure, sure. So you posted a sermon from Jeff Durbin that had nothing to do with abortion, but simply because of the views that he holds on abortion, you were then told, hey, you're kind of treading in dangerous waters, and if you choose to continue down this road, then there are going to be certain consequences.
Yeah, and I wasn't even necessarily abolitionist at the time. I was pro criminalization, but not necessarily anti incrementalism. Um, and I made that clear. And I even brought up Abby Johnson. I was like, if you guys are willing to work with Abby Johnson, I don't see why my views are an issue. She's pro criminalization and pro incrementalism, and my views are the same. Um, and so, I had brought up, like, I didn't quite understand why I was being, essentially punished for these views when I didn't even necessarily agree with them at the time. But that was the reality of the situation.
Oh, isn't it? I mean, I now this is my own words, my own opinion, but just listening to you talk, it sounds to me like, and just knowing how Kristen Hawkins argues, from my view, she argues she's just a feminist, right? And so this seems like quite anti-feminist, to discriminate against a woman for something that she believes. Um, so what happened after that? Like, so, you got this phone call. And these were kind of like the implications that were playing through your mind, that were kind of insinuated to you. So did you go and talk to your pastors? Or like what happened after that?
I was already in talks with my pastors. I was a part of Students for Life when I started attending Apologia. I made it clear to them up front when I introduced myself to them. And naturally, them being abolitionists and them holding these convictions on how this fight against abortion should play out already wanted to talk to me. Um, and so I was already in talks with them. I had a 3 hour sit down meeting with them um, where they discussed abolitionism with me and we kind of bounced ideas back and forth off each other. Um, and they knew based on my ideas Students for Life would eventually cast me out. They just didn't know when. But when I came to them after that happened, it was no shock to them.
So you were kind of already maybe expecting um, something like this to happen.
Yes, I just didn't think it would happen when I haven't even actually publicly supported the abolitionist movement. Just like internal convictions that I'd kept to myself, knowing I was a representative of Students for Life, whether they want to call us that or not, out of respect to an organization that was helping me. And they cast me out anyways because of internal convictions, not necessarily publicly pronounced ones.
Interesting. It seems it seems kind of discriminatory in a sense, where
Yeah,
it's. Go ahead.
yeah. The nature of this movement is you got to gatekeep what you got. I think it was my influence. They were worried my internal convictions would possibly turn other students away from them as well. Um, I was not, if you work within the Students for Life arena, or you've worked with them, or you even just hang out with their students, there's a very much an idolization, a god complex around Kristen. So much where in chants they have called her like this queen. Um, the actual wording of the chant. And to me, I've never held that sort of idolization for any person, abolitionists or Students for Life. And my idolization has always been for Christ. And so I was not easy to bend and maneuver to what they wanted. And that was the threat to them in relation to the other students I might bring with me, and not necessarily my internal convictions.
So basically, they didn't want you to be like a wrecking ball of sorts and win a bunch of students over to the cause of abolition. And so instead chose to preemptively like kind of ostracize you, um, but still allow you to remain to finish your fellowship, which was kind of strange to me, anyways.
Yeah, that's how it came off to me. Even though they let me finish the fellowship, um, I no longer received media interviews from that point forward. Nothing was set up by Students for Life. It was essentially a title I held, and nothing was done after that.
I see. I see. And so now, since then, you do abolition and like anti-IVF work. And I think abolition is addressed quite a bit. I think people have a lot of resources to go to talk about that. So let's talk a little bit more about IVF. And so why should we be also equally as focused and fervent about IVF as we are abortion?
I mean, the same reasons that we are about abortion. It is risking embryonic life. The numbers actually supersede abortion when it comes down to the death count of IVF. Obviously, the motivations are different. The motivations of abortion are going to rot society a lot quicker when mothers are admitting they want to kill their children. Um, and, the desire that comes from IVF is a good desire to have children. But the process itself is what's wrong. We see about 93% of embryos created via IVF will not make it through the process to live birth, which is extremely saddening.
Right, right. No, it's definitely treating human beings as a commodity. And so, um, I had seen a post you had made recently. I think maybe it was today or yesterday about this alternative technology, this alternative treatment. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so restorative reproductive technology, also known as RRT, the main form is going to be NAPRO technology or natural procreative technology. Um, and it is essentially a specialty that doctors can have where they work on restoring natural reproductive function rather than slapping some sort of band-aid on it. So you don't even need a NAPRO doctor if you're not planning. Um, you don't need it if you're planning on getting pregnant. You can use them for any reason. So if you've had a diagnosis like PCOS or endometriosis or any other, sort of female health issue, um, you can see an APRO doctor, and instead of the birth control slap that they'll put on it, or IVF or whatever other unnatural solution that's kind of just putting a band-aid on the problem, they actually work at fixing these issues or fixing the symptoms associated with it, because obviously there is no cure for some of these issues. um, and so we see specifically with women who are trying to get pregnant, when they go through the NAPRO technology route, about 65% of them who have already failed an IVF cycle will be able to conceive children naturally after going through NAPRO.
Wow, that's about 65%. That's pretty good. That's two out of three. Um, and that you said that's after a failed IVF treatment.
Yeah, so for whatever reason, they were diagnosed infertile or couldn't have children naturally. They tried to go through IVF. Their IVF cycle failed, and they turned to NAPRO, and they were able to conceive children naturally with NAPRO.
Okay, okay. And how far along is this technology?
It was they started funding and research, I believe, in the 1980s. It got its funding actually from the Catholic Church, who has been very boldly anti-IVF. Um, and the Catholic Church decided to fund this level of research for doctors so that they could fix it instead of, slapping these band-aids on it. These band-aids that the Catholic Church is very much against. And they'd realized that it was actually very successful. And so doctors have even left IVF clinics to begin their own NAPRO practice. And there's actually tons of them. I don't think people hear about this and they think like holistic hippie doctor, um, like sitting in a room full of like tie dye, and that's not what it is. These are like trained professionals who were usually OBGYN practitioners for years or some sort of fertility doctor who have decided that they actually want to help women and not just get into some sort of money making field like IVF.
Sure. No, that's actually amazing. Do you have a link that you could send me that I could put in the description for some of this NAPRO
Yeah,
stuff or like a map? Um, that
yeah,
would
I can find. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I think that would be really cool. I'd like to read up on some of this stuff and then also have a resource for people who may watch this and be like, well, that sounds like me. And so
yeah.
maybe they can go and look at this, or even somebody who's considering IVF. Do you have a stat off the top of your head um, about what the numbers would be for this NAPRO treatment for folks who haven't undergone IVF?
No, my research with NAPRO has strictly related to IVF. I know that you can, and I have friends who see NAPRO doctors for other reasons, um, but I haven't delved really into that kind of research. But I would assume if we're having major successes on the fertility front, which I think is much harder to fix than maybe some of these symptoms, then you would have even more success. But that's just conjecture.
So, I mean, to me at least, it sounds like something that needs to be made part of our messaging when we're talking to people about IVF and about abortion and these other things too, right? So that they can be made aware that this technology exists.
Yeah, I think it's very under talked about. And obviously, you don't need to come at them with a solution.